Well, hey there, everybody. It's Inside the Audio Booth. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. I'm also a narrator, if you didn't know that already. I've been using this program to talk with some of the fabulous authors that I work with. And you want fabulous. Well, ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you Richard R. Becker. There he is in the
Hey,
flesh.
hi,
Yeah,
Brian.
hey, I was gonna have some cannons go off behind me, but you really shouldn't do that in an audio
Some
booth.
streamers would be great.
That's right. That's right. Rich, thanks for taking the time with me. I know we're both excited about this. 50 States,
Yeah.
your new collection of short stories has just come out on audio. We can talk about the audio process in just a little bit, but I
Okay.
wanted to talk about the book itself first. It's this collection of short stories. You have a story for every one of the 50 states in the US. Very cool concept. I
Hey,
wanted
thank
to
you.
talk about what inspired you to go down this path and what's this book all about?
Well, I never anticipated that it would become 50 states on the front end. So
Hmm.
my first thought was actually I've been working in marketing and advertising and stuff like that for about 30 years, and I thought maybe it was time for me to write some of my own stories instead of just telling other people's stories. It might be kind of a fun thing. So in order to do that, I had to trick myself into getting like a hard deadline. And what I decided to do was write 50 stories. With one story a week. And I didn't know it was going to become 50 states, but what
Huh.
happened, it was sort of organic, is as I
Okay.
started writing these stories, one story a week, and sharing them on a Facebook page I had,
Okay.
um, and getting reactions from people
Hmm.
instead of going to like a writing club or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it just sort of took off that way. Each one happened to be in a different location for the first 10 stories. And I was like, well, I guess I could just do it for every state. And
Huh.
that's how it sort of developed. It was just one of those organic creative things.
That's awesome, and I don't mean this as a truth in advertising question, but have you been to all 50 states?
No, not all 50 states,
Okay.
but I've definitely been to a good, number of them. I don't necessarily have a count, but I've definitely been in every region, and that's what I did sometimes. Is I would borrow my regional expertise or
Yeah.
my regional sense of things, and kind of go from there. And
It
then,
it's
ironically, one of them I did struggle on Alaska and Hawaii because I've never been there.
mm,
So for Alaska, I had to really think about how it felt in living in Minnesota and Wisconsin in my early years.
mm.
That just the cold and that kind of thing, and that gave me some kind of sense. And then Hawaii, I had never been there, but ironically, I just was there after the book came out. So
Okay,
kind of fun,
alright.
yeah.
Wow, it really seemed like you knew all those states like the back of your hand when I was reading these things, so good on
Okay.
you. That's some good research done there, that's for sure. And I wanted to talk about just kinda the range of stories that, I was listening to here. You got, and reading, I should say,
Yeah,
Siren's Call, you've got a thriller with some cool action there. You've got Shine On, You Crazy Diamonds, felt like a horror story to me,
yeah,
and then you write some really poignant and sweet story like Forget Me Not. So,
yeah.
my question is, Rich, are you seeing a doctor for this split personality disorder, or what's going on with you? Let me know about that. So many different styles of the short story that
Well,
you went after
yeah,
here.
I think I'm a writer like I am a reader. I'm very eclectic. I can't read the same thing over and over. And I have people all the time, like if I do a review, let's say on science fiction, somebody
Uh-huh.
will reach out and they'll say, "Hey, can you review my book?" And I'll be like, "Oh, not now. Maybe in 3 or 4 books, I'll go back
Right.
to science fiction." It wasn't always that way, but that's kind of where I am now. So every book I read is different, and I think every story I do is different, and that kind of goes along with that split personality, I guess,
Yeah.
with
Right.
marketing communications because I've worked on over 1,000
Okay.
accounts. They're so different.
Yeah.
Everything from youth sports to
I
um,
see. Yeah.
the United States Air
You
Force.
have to
So
change your approach. I
you
get it.
change your
Yeah.
approach every single time. So it keeps me
Right.
engaged and excited about the stories that I'm writing.
That is so
Yeah.
cool. Well, I'm going to get into the audio production part here, folks, and we're going to try to listen to a little bit of this if we can. This was a really interesting thing for me to do to get involved with this piece. And what I'm going to have you do right now is listen, Rich, you're going to be able to listen
Yeah.
to this, and everybody else will too, to the very first story that is in 50 states here. We're talking about broken people. I'm going to play some of my narration here. Here we go. Broken People, Idaho, 2003. When Jonathan Cole accidentally ran over his 6-year-old boy with the carbine harvester, it was the worst day of his life, one that was quickly followed by a procession of runners-up for this honor in rapid succession. There was the divorce. There was the custody battle over their 3 surviving girls. There was the loss of 980 acres, 2/3 of his original farm, to buy out what the court decreed to his wife as alimony. There were the hundreds of days he would come home to an empty house, each of them part of his penance to reflect on all that he lost. Rich, just coming back to you here, this was such an interesting thing for me to read and a really gripping first story here.
Oh,
Why
thanks.
did you start with Broken People here?
Yeah, it was actually one of the ones that, since I was sharing this on a Facebook page, I would
Yeah.
get these reactions, and Broken People had one of the largest responses, and people just
Hmm.
really embraced it. And I think it's because of the if I had to guess, the shocking introduction of
Yeah.
somebody who's really, here it is, this tragedy, and then you
Yeah.
wonder, where is it going to go from here?
Mm.
uh, and that's why I ended up, everybody told me it was one of the strongest pieces, so that's kind of
Yeah.
what I led with, and the reviewers seem to see the same thing.
Yeah.
I've noticed that, like, a lot of times people will flip to their state first,
Sure.
in the
Sure.
book,
Right. Oh,
but
okay.
but I did sort of arrange the stories in a way that I thought would be fitting for the book, and make it a little more unpredictable,
Yeah.
and kind of exciting, and I think you've probably experienced that doing
Oh,
some of
very
the
much
narration.
so. And I just think this collection of stories is so well set up for audio. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
people take, little bits of time. Sometimes it's a longer commute. I get that, but it's a serial type of thing. Serial, meaning people can listen to these bits and pieces as they go along. It's not a longer text. You can listen for a few minutes, move on to another story, etc. I thought that was it really makes it a good for audio kind of book. Did you notice that too? I got into a good rhythm with this when I was narrating it.
Yeah, well, one of the first things, and I knew it would work really well with narration, because that's one of the things I always do is, I'm a big proponent of, you have to read your work, and
Yeah,
if it
I was
doesn't
gonna
sound
say.
right,
Okay. Yeah.
you have to throw it away or start over or tweak it so
Yeah.
that it does sound right.
Yeah.
And so I knew it would sound good, but then when I have a professional like yourself
Mm.
jump in and kind
Here
of
we go.
add even more,
Yeah.
add
Yeah.
even more life to it, and more energy to it, and get those characterizations down, it just, something magical happens, and I was really amazed by your work, and
Thank you.
um,
Thank you. And
so
I
that's
I
something
gotta
I'm.
say, just jumping in on that part, Rich, I kinda lost count. Now that first story you heard from Idaho, not a lot of strong accents there, but I had to
No.
pull off a Texas accent. I had to do Boston. I had to do New York.
Yeah.
My only, regret, I didn't get to use my California surfer dude
Oh,
voice,
right.
man.
I'll
But
work on that
yeah,
for
I know,
some
we'll get
future
another
book.
book in the works, b before too long, I'm sure. I guess I wanted to talk about that. You really were trying to play on a lot of regional dialects, I thought, in what you were doing here. That was a really interesting part of this.
Yeah, and well, I wanted everything to be as organic as possible. Now, sometimes the reviewers point out that some stories could be, like, I could transplant them any place, so they didn't
Mm,
have to be stuck to the particular place that they're in. Some of them, they do have to be there, um, but that's why the characters kind of play to that. And I think when you add the narration and you add the dialects and you can actually hear it, then you know that this is actually grounded in that particular area. You know.
wow. Yeah. And in doing that, this is that whole idea of reading aloud. I just wanted to know about your process. I mean, it's not so secret. I am a newscaster in my other secret identity, if you want to call it that. But in looking at that, I'm always reading my work aloud when I write it. Is it
Mhm.
something where you're going along, writing a paragraph, and then reading it? Is that your process, or what's that
No,
like?
no, I don't break it up that much. I kind
Okay.
of, I try to get into this, different people call it different things,
Mm,
like an alpha zone or something like that, where
okay.
the story starts writing itself, and that's kind of the place I want to be in when I'm writing a story, is get to some point where the story is just kind of moving along, and if I don't feel that, then I'll stop, and I'll come back to it later. Like, I'll mull it over in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, Actually, with 50 states, I'm gonna skip just a little bit,
Please, yeah.
because I think this is kind of interesting. Some people found this interesting, was that I would actually be writing in my head, three or four stories at a time,
Wow.
and working on one actually on the text, but I would already be thinking about the next two or three stories down the line. And I
Hmm.
didn't necessarily know where the inspiration would come from on all these stories, but that's what I would do. So I'd have two, three, four stories at a time in my head, and then working on one. And then once I got the one done, then I would definitely read it. I would pass it
Mhm.
to my wife, who's also in communication marketing, so she was a
Yeah.
good editor.
Mhm.
I later on, I had a editor for the entire project. That
Sure.
was
Yeah.
because I didn't want to lay that on my wife. That
Yeah,
wouldn't have
right.
that
Right.
wouldn't have been
My wife edits me all the time
good.
too,
Yeah,
but
right.
nothing
But
to
you
do
don't
with
want to lay
books.
it on
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, keep going.
Miss
Yeah.
that.
Right. Right.
So, there was that kind of aspect to it, and then, like I said, I would share. I'm not doing that now, but I do share some work, but I
Okay.
would share it immediately to get that immediate response from people
I
out there.
see. I see. Wow.
Yeah.
And was it a deal where you were trying to work out one story and that led into another, or what was how did you string the stories
No,
together?
they're just very different. I just kind of knew I would be like, so if I was working on Broken People and I was
Mhm.
thinking about something about, I'm like, well, what am I going to do with Hawaii? And at
Mm,
that particular time with the Hawaii story, COVID was so.
that's right.
I really stayed away from the COVID stories, even though I was writing some of this during COVID. I didn't
Right.
want COVID to dominate my
No.
work, but
Yeah.
that was Hawaii was one story where it did come up and it seemed to fit. So I was
Oh, it
thinking
really
about
did.
everything that was going along, even though I was working on you know, Broken People. I was thinking about Hawaii, and that's kind of how it kind of worked. But at the same time, I was
Wow.
thinking like, well, I really need to do some action too. So,
Right? Mhm.
so that's kind of how all these things just developed.
There was plenty of action in this too. I mean, just such a wide range of writing here. And as we start to move through here, Rich, and wrap up, I wanted to try to figure
Yeah.
out what's next for you. What's next on the horizon in terms of what you're writing, what you're working on. I know we just started with this whole thing, but what's down the line for you?
Well, most immediately, well, right now I'm working on just making sure that people find out about the audiobook because that's
Me too.
definitely new. And
Hmm.
a lot of people release their books with the audiobooks at the same time, and I didn't have that luxury. So I kind of sort of did a slow launch on mine. I released one hard copy edition, and then I did the Kindle edition, then I did a Nook edition, and now there's a hardcover and there's all these different versions, and now we have
I
the
see.
audiobook. So I'm doing that, but I did already lock down 10 stories that I'm going to release as a Kindle exclusive. It's
Cool.
called 10 Threads. And a lot of the stories, not all of them, but a lot of the stories actually build on, they're still standalone stories, but they also build almost as if they feel like a second chapter to some of the stories in 50 states.
Oh, wow.
And what I'm going to do then,
Hmm.
so that's going to be released as a Kindle exclusive. And then I
Okay.
think I'm going to put together about 25 stories, including those 10,
Hmm.
and release that as a hard copy because the
I
stories are
see.
getting a little bit longer. So
Sure.
I don't want to do 50 again. I think 50 is a lot of stories.
It's a
So,
lofty goal. You did
so
it though.
I
Yeah.
might do
Mhm.
two projects where I have 25 and 25. But at the same time, I'm also just to show you how much I bounce around. I'm also working on a longer story that's sort of separate from that, and I'm
Okay.
also working on a novel. Which the first chapter of that is kind of in 10 threads, so you can kind of get a sample of where I'm going to go with that. So I have
Wow.
multiple projects all the time, and that's kind of what I'm used to in my
Yep.
field. You know,
Yep. Me too. Me too.
yeah.
Well, Rich, I gotta say, it was a pleasure narrating this book. I wanted to thank you very,
Oh,
very much for
thanks.
having me involved. It was a lot of fun, and it really kind of put me through my paces in terms of what I need to do as a narrator and so many different stories and so many different styles to them. Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Hey, it was great to have you. I was so happy that we made this connection
Me
because
too.
as soon as we from the audition tape on, and then when we first heard the
Yeah.
first few stories, I was like, wow, this is it. We're
That's
definitely going in the right direction. You
that's
know?
awesome to hear. That's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, sir. Once again, it's Richard R. Becker. The R stands for run out and get this book immediately on audio. We're talking about 50 States, a collection of stories now on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. Rich, thanks again for taking the time with me. And thanks everybody for listening to Inside the Audio Booth. You can find more of my work at briancallahanmedia.com.